So after almost 4 years, Sony has finally updated their A6000 line of cameras, and I'm really happy that they didn't change the form factor. Now what they did was include a much better sensor, better autofocus, pro video capabilities, and just so much more. Now I went out and shot some professional baseball with it and even took it to Italy to test it out.
The A6700 has the same, so on the photography side, the Sony A6700 has the same sensor as the Sony FX30, which wasn't surprising, to be honest. That's what Sony's been doing lately. Actually everybody's like kind of recycling their technology, but it's actually a pretty big leap because the old 24 megapixel sensor, the color science, it made you look sick. Compared to like the Sony A6500, man, like it gave you like this yellowish tone to the skin. You looked like you had the flu or something. So this one has that modern color science, and I think, again, a very noticeable jump in quality with this sensor.
Because the camera is so new, I could not open up the raw files, but just looking at the JPEGs, they looked really damn good. I'm not gonna lie, the image quality and the colors that you're gonna get on this camera are far better than previous APS-C cameras like the A6500.
All right, I'm gonna jump in really quickly, and I wanna tell you about my new studio portrait presets. I know everyone has presets, but these are genuinely like really good. As you know, I do a lot of studio portraits and I use a lot of different cameras. These are made for anyone that shoots in the studio. Now, presets are usually really abrasive to skin tones and just studio work in general. These are made not to be abrasive. You get some orange, those orange tones in the skin when you're using flash. There are a couple of presets that are gonna help with that and neutralizing that. You wanna add more color to the skin in a subtle, pleasant way. These are what the presets are for, and adding that subtle pop to the images without just completely like just obliterating them. So for the first week, I'm gonna have them on sale. There are 9 of them. So the link will be down below. It's on my website. First week on sale. Okay. The Sony A6700 shares the same autofocusing system as the Sony A7R5 and ZV-E1, and I own both of those cameras, and it works great. It's got the same processor and the same AI processing unit. When I shot Major League Baseball with this camera, it wasn't the autofocus, but I was having trouble with controlling the autofocus using this camera, and it's mostly on the ergonomics. We'll talk about ergonomics later. Cut. So like I said before, I use the Sony A6700 for professional sports. The speed of this camera, man, this is one of the missed opportunities, I think, but it's got 11 frames per second mechanical and it can only shoot, I'm saying only because I'm thinking about the competition, it can only shoot 11 frames per second with the electronic shutter. So there's not really much of an improvement in terms of speed with this camera. And on top of that, the rolling shutter performance isn't great when you're shooting electronic shutter.
All right, so in looking at the competition, the Canon R7, for example, can shoot 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter. And even the Fuji X-T5 can shoot 20 frames per second. Now, even though the jello effect is worse on the R7, I still wish they gave the A6700 the ability to shoot faster frames per second in electronic shutter, given that this camera has the same processing power of the Sony A7R5.
The Sony A6700 is pretty much the photo version of the FX30, as if Sony didn't have enough tiers of cameras. The interesting part about this camera is that it's pretty much a carbon copy of the FX30 when it comes to video. Yes, it shoots the same 6K oversampled 4K footage. You get access to 10-bit video, 4K 10-bit video. If you shoot APS-C currently, the old 8-bit footage just can't hold a candle to 10-bit footage. Once you go to 10-bit, you'll never go back because you have access to S-Log 3, and color grading is so much better. You get so much more dynamic range with footage like this. Not only do you get that, you get up to 4K 120 frames per second. You have access to that, and it records up until it overheats and shuts down, which is one of the problems of this camera. We'll get into that right after this.
When you do shoot 4K 120, however, it does come with a pretty hefty crop like you see here.
You get 240, you have access to 240 frames per second in HD. You even have some features that the FX30 doesn't have, which Sony has been doing lately with their cameras. They put some of the newer features in and leave the older cameras, they don't have them. Like, for example, well, to be fair, this camera has the AI processing unit, so you have access to auto framing, which is insanely useful if you like to film yourself. You don't get access to center framing, which the Sony ZV-E1 has. It doesn't have that, but it does have the auto framing. And mine's brain going mush here, but no, I'm back on track. It has focus breathing compensation, all those latest features. It even has where you can import your LUTs, like the Sony FX30, FX3. You can upload your LUTs, you can import your LUTs and preview them on the rear screen, which it hurts my head sometimes, you know, to think about that. Why doesn't the Sony A7S III have this? Why doesn't the Sony A1 have this? I have these cameras, why don't they have them? It boggles my mind, but as you can see, this camera is it's a packed powerhouse video camera. But the cripple hammer comes into play when it comes to how long this camera can shoot. What's crazy is that the camera that's filming me right now, the Sony ZV-E1, it's about the same size body with a full frame sensor, and that camera can outlast this camera in almost every frame rate. 4K 30, 4K 120, 4K 60, this camera overheats faster than the Sony ZV-E1.
I tested the overheating at various frame rates and was always getting different results. With 4K 30 screen closed, the most I was able to get was about 50 minutes of record time at room temperature with the screen closed and 52 minutes with the screen open. Other times I would be able to get around 30 minutes of time with the screen closed. You know, it didn't matter if there was a little bit of sun coming in or not. It was just very inconsistent. With 4K 60, I got around 9 minutes with the screen closed and 13 minutes with it open. With 4K 120, I got about 14 minutes with the screen closed and 20 minutes with it open. Honestly, I struggle to find consistency with the length of recording time that you could be expecting with this camera. I'm just kind of shocked that my Sony ZV-E1, which is about the same size, could shoot consistently longer, and that has a full frame sensor.
All right, ergonomics of this camera. There's a lot to like, and there's one thing that I'm not a huge fan of. So one thing I've been harping about with Sony, improve your grips. Canon has been making amazing grips that's a soft rubber texture. It's very comfortable to hold. Sony makes like this harder plastic texture. Well, on this camera, they listened. This one has not only a bigger grip than all the other APS-C cameras, but it is soft rubber, and arguably probably the best grip Sony has made in any camera. Honestly, it feels really good in the hand. That was great. Just keep rolling with that one. Another big improvement that they did with this camera, it's a front dial here. So all the other APS-C cameras, they don't have this front dial, so you're limited in changing your settings using, you know, the jog wheel and this rear dial. It's not very good, especially if you're using it as a professional tool. Now that you can change your settings, your shutter, speed, aperture, using the front and rear dial, almost like as if you're using a full frame camera, just like the Sony A7 A7R5. Now you have a dial here that you're gonna change with your thumb instead of your index finger. Quickly, I actually like this one better than the A7 IV, A7R5. Quickly change from photo, video, into S&Q with your thumb. Very nice, and it locks in pretty good there. Not like you're gonna hit it by accident. So personally, I like that a lot. The EVF, so the EVFs on these cameras have always been very lackluster. I mean, look at the little tiny hole that you're trying to stick your eyeball in. It's very small, but they improved it. So this one has a 2.36 million dot EVF, 120 FPS refresh rate. So when you look in there, it's actually pretty good. It's pretty bright, and honestly, I really have little complaints, pun intended, because it's still a very small EVF. The screen, it's touchscreen. You could touch control, you can touch to change your settings, which I absolutely love. Canon does that, and we need that in all the cameras sometimes. So yes, full touch, which is great.
They also made minor changes to the button layout of the camera, like including a custom button where the record button used to be on the inner part of the handle, and they changed the position of the on and off switch. I'm assuming to prevent accidental bumps. That it definitely took some getting used to.
Now for the ports, it does have a mic and a headphone jack, and honestly, it looks almost exactly like the Sony ZV-E1, the side of the camera. It does have the digital interface, so basically you could use a K3M microphone on here, XLR, any digital wireless mic, which is awesome, which I'm not surprised Sony's including that in all their newer cameras. And of course, camera uses the larger Z battery, so you're gonna get pretty good battery life. My only complaint about the ergonomics of this camera, it comes back to not having a joystick. So with the autofocus nowadays, it's like the camera can almost guess what you want it to do. The problem is that when you're using it in a professional setting, right? Let's just say shooting professional baseball. The problem is that the autofocus is so good that it starts to it tries to focus on the crowd and everything around the player. And when I wanted to kind of make it, you know, constrict it so that it only focused on the batter, for example, I'm not able to switch quickly to AF, let's say medium spot, and move a box around because I don't have a joystick. So that made it a little tough to use, to be honest. So that is really my only complaint. It's like, I guess it just depends on what you're doing. But I'm gonna be honest with you, there's a lot of people looking over here at me, and I'm getting kind of shy, so I'm gonna cut this short.
It's funny because just a couple of years ago, some claimed APS-C was dead, and now there are a ton of great lens options and some really solid cameras like the FX30 and the A6700. Personally, I have too many cameras to justify picking this one up, but anyone that has the A6600 or older, I think this camera upgrade makes a lot of sense. The video upgrades alone make it worth it, and for photography, you know, the updated sensor, the autofocus, and the ergos, I think would be the reason why I would pick this one up.